Dr. Ruth Backstrom, you are the author of a new book that's coming out. I think it's new. Has it come out yet?
No, it's coming out March 30th. And
Okay,
here it
great.
is. Here's how it's going to look.
Great.
Igniting a bold new democracy.
All right, got some free PR there going. That's wonderful. That's great.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
called Igniting a Bold New Democracy, Empowering Citizens Through Game-Changing Reforms. Now, you're not local to Georgia. You're from Chicago, am I correct?
Originally, I'm actually in North Carolina now. I'm in Durham, North Carolina.
Okay. You have a very interesting political background. Take us through that particularly formative experience that I believe you encountered as a teenager
Yeah,
in Chicago. So talk to
yeah,
us a little
right.
bit about that.
Yeah, that's a really interesting story. So I was 13 years old, and at the time I was attending a integrated school. Actually, it was mostly not. It was like 90% African American at the time. And there was a protest that was called, and my best friend called me up and said, "Do you want to join this protest? Because we're going to get schools integrated. It's for integrating the Chicago public schools." And I said, "Yeah," because I was going to that school, and that school was it had twice the number of students it should have had. It had what was called an up and down staircase kind of circular thing to keep the traffic patterns okay. In fact, there was a book written called Up the Down Staircase that described those schools. And so I knew that those schools were in trouble and that we needed to integrate and get better schools. So I got on the IC to go downtown as a 13-year-old, you have to imagine, with my best friend. And we got there and we were going to talk to the superintendent, but he said he didn't want to talk to us. So then the decision was that we would sit down in the park as a protest, and then we'd get arrested. So I sat down, and as I sat down, I saw the leader like getting beaten and blood like streaming down his face. And as a 13-year-old, this was like really shocking to me. It was like the first time I'd seen something like that, since my brother maybe got hit or something, there was blood, but I'd never seen it with a police, beating someone up. And so I was kind of scared, and I grabbed arms with my friend who I was there with, and I said, "Let's hold on tight." And then the policeman said, "I'm going to get that one." And then I had these visions of like blood, and I said, "I am walking in." And I walked into the paddy wagon. So I really admire all those protesters who sat there and got beaten, because I realized I just couldn't imagine doing that. It was so scary to me. Of course, I was 13, but even so, I really have deep respect for those people that went through those bloody and painful experiences. And one
So
of the questions
what prompted you to actually, did your parents know about this? I mean, did they know
they
you were going to
they
have this?
did. My parents were liberal parents. My mother was a lawyer, actually. And we lived in an integrated neighborhood, so we were committed to that sort of thing. And she actually, when I was younger, I said to her, "This isn't fair." We were driving through a neighborhood. I mean, I was like 7. I just came in with that in my DNA, I think, to tell you the truth. And I said, "This isn't fair. We need to give them some money." And my mother said, "Well, we work really hard for our money." And I'm like, "Yeah, but," and I didn't really mean just us, but as a 7-year-old, you can't quite figure out what you're supposed to say. Anyway, so by the time I was 13, I kind of knew what the story was, because I was going to a school like that. So then my mother knew that I would do something like this. So she said to her friend, "Yeah, I knew this was coming." So she
So
was not
you're
surprised.
arrested, you're 13 years old.
Yeah,
I assume you're taken to a Chicago police precinct and
yeah,
booked and
that's right.
fingerprinted and
Well, because I was
mugshotted and all that.
underage, you don't get booked because you're
Oh, okay.
underage, you know. But the thing is that we got down there, and then they said, "Okay, just give your name as Jane Doe," which was and then which was really just confused the authorities. And then when we did that, they said, "Okay, we're going to put you in the Audi home," which was like this, horrible place that you didn't want to go to for love or money. And so then we started giving our names. And our parents came in groups, so they didn't have to all take off from work, because there was kind of, word got out that we were down there. So they took us home. And my friend Barbara, who actually didn't get up and go through, didn't get up, but actually got thrown into the paddy wagon, was on the evening news, and they kind of yanked her arm back and threw her into the paddy wagon. So that was my experience at 13 years old with.
So can you tell me what year this was?
Yeah, it's 1963.
Okay, okay. So this is
Um,
right in the heart of the national civil rights movement
it was,
when
it
this
was.
happened.
That's right, it was. And yeah, so and one of the questions that really led me to write this book is the question of why haven't we made more progress on these things, and what stopped us and stuff.
So,
And
and I read the little synopsis of the book where, again, it's called Igniting a Bold New Democracy, where you're calling on thought leaders, nonprofits, professors, activists, and civic leaders, and you're emphasizing the power of using proven facilitation techniques to help people reconnect and unite around their shared desires. I know you're a professor and a magnificent educational pedigree, but as a reader, I got to tell you, that just sounds very nebulous. So how can we talk specifics,
yes, yes,
to help our readers and viewers a
absolutely.
little
That's
more understand what we're talking
Yeah,
about?
that's a great question. So well, there's several examples I'm going to give you on that one. Let's start with a Stanford study, which was done in Dallas, Texas. And they took 500 people in a room. They called it America in One Room. And they had NORC, the National Opinion Research Center, design it so it was representative of America. It had proportionally the same numbers you'd have in America. And they talked about 5 different, areas: economics, immigration, et cetera, some of the hot topic things. And they did a survey before they came and after they came, both on the issues and how they felt about democracy. And what they said was it was 30% in the beginning, with a feeling of how our democracy was doing. It was really low, a low rating for how our democracy was doing. And they were very far apart in the beliefs of, the Democrats or the conservatives and the liberals. And then at the end of the facilitation, they both moved closer to the center, and the rating of our democracy had gone from 30% to 60%. And it just shows that if you have a taste of talking to your neighbor and being heard, it can have a really powerful effect on how you feel about your democracy. I mean, that's a powerful difference, 30% to 60%. And then the next thing I want to talk about is what they're doing in Austria, actually, which is really interesting. They're using a technique called dynamic facilitation, which was invented by Jim Ruff. And it's a very powerful nonlinear approach that takes in solutions and concerns about the solutions. So you start to work as a group and come up with a united solution at the end. This is a nice theory, but in Austria, they took this idea seriously. And they started, in 2005, they started convening a citizens' assembly, which meant like 23 people were convened. And the topic, for instance, was immigration on one of them. And they start talking about that. And one guy said, and at first, and so it's prepared so all the information is brought to the citizens, so they kind of know all the background they need to know about this topic. And the idea is they're going to give the voice of the people to the government on this topic. And at first, they were kind of shocked by the numbers of people that were flooding into Austria, because the government had not been entirely transparent about this. And so that was the first thing. And then as they got talking more, they started saying, we need to see the people behind these numbers. It was like their sense of shared humanity sort of rose to the top. And this is the great thing about groups that are really well facilitated, is they can get to really deep levels in their compassion and their thinking. So then in the course of it, one guy said, well, I don't think these people deserve jobs. And the facilitator welcomes everything, even the diverse points of view. And she says, well, tell me more about that. And then he said, well, my niece has been looking for a job for a couple of years now, and she hasn't been able to find one. So why should she, not be able to get a job and they should? And so then the group said, well, let's open it up to people who don't have a job and we'll make job fairs for all of them, which is what they did. They then created what are called World Cafe meetings. And this is traditional. After you do the Citizens Council, the Citizen Councils come up with something and they introduce it to other people through these World Cafe events. And so they did it at these and then they turned it into job fairs. That was the next level. So they've kind of systematized it in Austria. So the voice of the people actually gets acted on. So they create the World Cafes, and then they created the job cafes as a response to what the people wanted. And the gentleman who's doing that, his name is Manfred Hilregel, he said, this is changing their culture. He said, no politician could say this about immigrants needing to be seen without, there wasn't enough political cover for them. And it's giving another alternative route into getting the voice of the people over the special interests. And he said that all the young people want this now. They can see how special interests is ruining democracy all across Europe, actually.
So what it sounds like what you're saying, and I think that most people feel this way, that there are a lot more things that unite us, viewpoints that unite us than divide us, and yet our political system is so divided. How much of this national political division do you think is attributable to people on social media, just going on Twitter and what have you, just lambasting the opposition with no interest or even possibility for finding any kind of commonality?
Yeah, we absolutely need to regulate that, as other countries have done, and it's a huge problem. And in a way, it's like we haven't really adapted our sensibilities, our laws, our regulations to a 21st century democracy. And that's the point that one of the points I'm saying is that we need a modern 21st century democracy that can address some of these issues that we just haven't addressed at all.
So, what are the components of a modern 21st century democracy outside of the system that has been in place for over 200 years?
Yeah, I'd like us to move towards what I call a partnership model of democracy, uh, which means not only, and that's really what our democracy was designed to be. It was designed that people would be inspired to do big things so they would work together. But unfortunately, special interests came in and they didn't need so much the will of the people. And so they veered off into doing what their donors wanted instead of what people wanted. But we could go back to this idea of a partnership democracy. And that's not only a partnership between, say, the political parties, but a partnership between civic actors and their local administrators. And this is exactly where we should start. We should find local people that are interested in things like what's happening in Austria and would like to replicate some of these things. That's what we should be doing. We should be trying to find places that bring us together. I mean, protests have been going on for a long time, but they're just, they're not that effective because they've got sort of a system where they're basically putting more people in jail for them instead of addressing these issues. So we need to come together and have a louder voice that actually moves a vision forward. A new vision for democracy is what I talk about. And some of the things, there's three pain points particularly for me. One is inequality. We cannot maintain this level of inequality and maintain a democracy. And history has shown that. There's lots of studies now that show that if you can't have a more equitable system, you either go towards revolution or repression. And we can kind of see those forces swinging back and forth in our own country. So handling the inequality is an essential piece of having a stronger democracy. And then the other pain point for me is the criminal justice system. I have a biracial grandson, and my daughter just calls me sometimes in tears. I want a world where African American parents can sleep at night without being afraid of what's going to happen to their children, and where their dreams can be fulfilled. And then the third point is, I really think we have to get money out of politics. That has been a huge problem. That's where it's like one of those things. If you imagine a fabric, it's the one fabric that if you pulled that out, so many of our problems would unravel, I think. And there's an interesting story of a group in Maine in 1990s that passed the Clean Election Act, and they started funding their candidates. And by 2008, 80% of their candidates were funded. And they had people like school teachers, firefighters in their legislature, people that you would never see in a legislature because they couldn't afford to run for office. And the great thing about it was they then created these really progressive platforms for working people as a result. So we kind of have an example from them of what would happen if we actually got money out of politics. We could have a much more sane political system that really responded more effectively to the needs of people.
Money is the driving force in the American political system. I don't think anyone could argue or dispute that. And it was interesting that you brought the money aspect into this, because I was going to ask you, if we take private donations out of the American political spectrum, there are obviously constitutional First Amendment right to free speech aspects of that
I know,
that has been used to prevent public funding of
I know,
elections.
I know,
So
I know that
how do you get around that issue? Do you make all elections publicly funded? What are the mechanics and the financial tools that are needed to make that happen? Is that even remotely doable or realistic?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that like Maine did it on its own local level. I think local, in terms of getting it widespread, it's difficult. It's absolutely difficult. But I think if we started a movement to do it, we could copy what Maine did. And it's the thing is, you realize if they got enough publicity, I mean, what other countries do is they give them free publicity, which would be really helpful too. Uh, I mean, we should just copy some of the things that other countries have done. I mean, we're the only country in the world that has this insane system of electing people like this, where it's really, I mean, let's admit it, it's legalized bribery at this point. It's like,
Free
and
publicity. I want to circle back to free publicity. Now, are you actually saying that we need more campaign commercials
oh
flooding the
no, not
airwaves?
campaign commercials, actual conversations. And actually, this is an interesting point. Braver Angels is working on what is the conversation we need to know in order to vote for somebody. What kind of questions should we be asking? And they've been working on creating, and I mean, those are kinds of things we can do too. Improve our town hall meetings for sure. Instead of just throwing political slogans around, can we ask questions that really get down to deeper answers? I mean, you can imagine there's all kinds of levels on which partnership democracy would make a lot of sense. It makes more sense. In fact, if you wanted to carry it even further, what if you had Republicans and Democrats working together and running on it as a team in a local place? I mean, just let your imagination go with what that would look like. Like,
That's virtually unheard of.
I know,
I don't
but
think it's ever been done before.
well, there was talk of doing it in Colorado at one point. Actually, Colorado is kind of an interesting what do they call it? First developer of some ideas. They're working on, I'm not sure where they are on their healthcare, but they're working on actually giving healthcare to everybody too in their state. So anyway, I think it's better to have more opinions in the room. Like, our diversity is not a liability, it's our greatest asset when it comes to problem solving. So why not bring people together instead of this winners takes all system, which is obviously not working?
How
Like,
is
what?
diversity our greatest strength? I mean, that's a talking point that many politicians use, but when it comes to actually explaining how it is, the explanations are few and far between. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Tim. So I think the thing is, the more perspectives that you bring into a room, the better your problem solving and the more your imagination expands. There's this woman at Drusilla Cornell that talks about how that's the greatest thing about democracy is the diversity expands your imagination. You can start to think about things that you've never thought about before. And that precedes actually creating them and then creating more things. And then, it enriches that cycle of imagining and creating.
We are wrapping up our conversation with Dr. Ruth Backstrom here on the First Alert Desk weekly political update. She is the author of a new book, Igniting a Bold New Democracy, Empowering Citizens Through Game-Changing Reforms. Realistically, a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what would you like to see having transpired in the local, statewide, or national political spectrum? We talk a lot about nebulous ideas, and it's been great to hear some concrete ideas from our conversation, but realistically, what can we expect to happen nationally or statewide or local in the next 1 to 10 years?
I think we can start with small wins. Like I do think having better town hall meetings would be a great place to start. And then expanding that to having meetings where, people try and create a middle ground where we can agree on big issues, like everybody agrees on getting money out of politics. So start with the things that we agree on instead of going always into this fighting back and forth, and start to have citizens become empowered. We have a lot more power than we're taking. And that's the thing. If we got together and started creating an agenda and made it national, what I would like to see is a national civic agenda. And there's pieces of it here and there. Massachusetts did a really interesting thing that they're talking about an economic bill of rights, which was actually an idea of Franklin Roosevelt's, but he died before it became a fact. But it's an idea that's kind of echoed down the years. And I think we should call back this idea of investing in people like we did after World War II, when we sent 7 million people to school for free. We need to get school at a reasonable price. And Biden has been working on that. But we need to get the price down so that it's not so expensive. Other countries do not have such high costs for education. It shouldn't be that high. And we need to get it down, regulate it, and then give it to people for free. But what I would like is in the next 5 years to have a clear vision where we're not only preparing for now, but the future. And we have a clear vision of where we want to go. So we're not blindsided by it. Because otherwise, things are going to get rougher and rougher. I mean, there's already a lot of tough things going on, and we need to come together and comfort each other and have lots of conversations, healing conversations, listening conversations, and then planning conversations for how we're going to create the future that we want.
This has been a great conversation. We thank Dr. Ruth Backstrom, author of a new book coming out when? March
30th.
March 30th.
Yeah, thank you so much for having you on here. I really enjoyed it.
Igniting a Bold New Democracy, Empowering Citizens Through Game-Changing Reforms. All right, yeah, go ahead and show the. If we're going to get
really
a full
like
screen,
I really
there
like
we
the
go.
picture.
Move it over that way. There we go. Now we can see it nice and
you can go to my website too, Ruth Backstrom, Backstrom, and there's a blog in there about partnership democracy, and there's also tips for how to handle disputes within your family, and more good stuff there. And I look forward to meeting some of you in meeting citizen assemblies in the future. That's my vision, is citizen assemblies coming to America within the next 5 years.
Thanks all of you for watching this edition of First Alert Desk Political Update.
Thanks so much.